you looking for a different level of truth about your challenges and struggles? Then be a part of the Yes and podcast, hosted by empowerment strategist and trauma specialist Jennifer Whitacre. Every Wednesday, we challenge conventional thinking on topics like trauma, healing, and so much more. Learn life lessons and great nuggets of wisdom from guests who've moved through their pain and suffering to discover a new purpose in life. Now, here's your host, Jennifer Whitacre.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Whitacre, and you are watching or listening to another episode of Yes And. If you're interested in learning more about me or about Yes And, please visit jenniferwhitacre.com, and you can learn more about the podcast at jenniferwhitacre.com/podcast. Today's guest on Yes And is Harry Sherwood. Harry Sherwood's dedication to following his heart led him to travel the world. Over the last decade, he lived with and learned from monks, yogis, martial arts masters, professors, and psychologists. Harry practiced thousands of hours of meditation and received a religious studies degree from the University of Michigan. Along the way, he studied Tai Chi, Qigong, Kriya Yoga, meditation, mindfulness, and psychology. Harry also took part in shamanic ceremonies, tribal ceremonies, plant medicine ceremonies, and funeral ceremonies ranging from China to Ghana to Indonesia to California. The culmination of these experiences led Harry to found consciously.org, where he and Melanie McDaniel guide people into fulfillment, transformation, and expanded awareness in mind, body, and spirit. And Harry is here today to have a conversation with me about the holidays and the winter blues. And we hear people a lot of times who struggle through the holidays and who struggle and suffer from emotional pain and distress throughout the winter. It seems to be a really hard time of year for people. And so much of what we read in articles is incredibly disempowering for people. And it keeps us in a state of victimhood. So Harry and I are going to have a conversation today about how you might be able to pull yourself out of the victimhood and be empowered even in the midst of the struggle. Just because you're having a struggle in life doesn't mean you can't be empowered through it. Harry, welcome to the show, and I'm honored that you're here to have this conversation with me today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here and to have a great conversation that hopefully adds some value.
Yeah. So Harry, tell us just a little bit more about yourself and about consciously.org and just a little bit about what you do so the listeners can get a better feel for who you are.
Sure. So a quick background on myself. Over 10 years ago, I started to learn meditation. But I felt suffocated in Western society and in my own life, in the life I had been leading. And so, long story short, I wound up traveling to China and studying Tai Chi and Qigong with Shaolin monks for 4 months, then came back to the States, moved into an ashram and lived with monks and yogis for the next 6 months, changed my life. That year was the beginning. And then I went, got my religious studies degree with an emphasis in consciousness studies, came back, worked for a little while, went back to the ashram for another stint of time, another 5 months. And I was making a decision whether I wanted to live there the rest of my life because it had been so impactful and because of so many different factors that we might get into today. And so that took place over about 5 years. And then the second half of that decade that I was talking about in that, or that you read about in the intro, was much more boots on the ground back in the world. I met Melanie McDaniel, my partner. She had come to the healing path, to the personal development or spiritual path via trauma and healing from trauma, had been in and out of Western therapy since she was 9, something like that. And so years and years and years of it, I learned from her, she learned from me. We started to study some more things, sat in plant medicine ceremonies, sat in Vipassana. Now we actively engage in different cultures and learning about different ways of life to expand our own experience, but expand our own perspective and bring that to our clients. And with our clients, we utilize meditation, whether it be secular or spiritual. We utilize plant-based nutrition, emotional release, and that's Melanie's expertise and area, and then lifestyle coaching. Just kind of where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, and how do we get you there? And so we kind of mix and match all of those, and we bring in a very spiritual perspective with it all, and help people dive deeper, connect deeper, and understand themselves on a level to where that knowledge helps them find a life and live a life that they love and they're connected to.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And, just to add to that, I recently met Harry and Melanie in person in Arizona just a couple months ago. And Harry, I got to say, I was blown away by the wisdom that you and Melanie both hold as such young people. You don't see that level of wisdom in somebody your age typically. It usually takes a few more years of life experience and getting beaten around by life to get to that level. So it really is quite impressive, again, for the age group that you're in. And when I listened,
Well, I appreciate that.
Yes, and it's a pleasant surprise to meet young people with such wisdom and peace inside of you. It's not often, old souls.
Old souls. Funny quick story about old soul. I appreciate that, and it's and on Mel's side, she has been through the ringer at a very early age, and on my side, I went seeking, and along that way, I met some wonderful people that taught me a lot about life. But at the ashram, one of the monks used to joke. People used to say to him, "Oh, you're an old soul," and he's like, "God, don't tell me that." And they say, "Why not?" He says, "That because I'm getting something wrong. I keep coming back if that's the case."
Right.
I always thought that was a funny little anecdote or story around that.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully for all of us, this is the last go around and we can really level up and move on. Yeah.
Good.
And when I sat through your presentation at the retreat, again, I was really, really impressed with, again, your wisdom and your knowledge, because it was so evident to me just in your presentation that you're not out there teaching spiritual hijacking. You're not teaching bypassing. You're not teaching a bunch of BS. You really, truly get what it takes to heal. And that's kind of what I would like to talk about today, and apply it to, the wintertime. I live in Ohio in the Midwest where, tonight we've got a high of, I think, 9 degrees or a low of 9 degrees tonight.
Wow.
Like we're in the 20s today, and then it gets warmer for the next few days, like we've got, a week and a half of like upper 30s and 40s ahead of us. But tonight's one of those anomalies where it's just kind of, a little colder than normal. And people can get really down on themselves. They can, get depressed. And it's easy to get stuck in that victimhood, to be almost literally victimized by the weather and, by the weather from the area that we live in. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about, how can we stay empowered, and how can we get through like the winter blues, or, we've got Christmas next week. How can we survive the holidays when we are emotionally struggling inside of ourselves, and maybe even shift the language away from surviving the holidays or beating the winter blues into, something that's a little more empowering to get through that, and practices that are more empowering to get through these tough times, because we all have tough times. It's part of life.
Yeah. And I think the first and last thing you said, I'm going to put together, because I think that's the key, which is, if we look at the cyclical patterns of just the weather, of the earth, of our own hormonal, fluctuations of life, if we understand, like, going to the root of reality very quickly, most things are energy. And if you look at energy, it acts a specific way. Most energy is in a frequency or a wave pattern. And so if we look at that wave pattern, and I understand that even Newtonian physics tells me that my body's mostly made of energy and empty space. And so if I understand that all things are energy, and I understand that, look, what does energy happen? It has a peak and it has a trough. It has a peak and it has a trough. And so what spirituality teaches us is to recognize the nature of life and to find our peace in that. And
Mhm.
so one of the reasons that I feel like a lot of people struggle this time of year, a lot of people struggle with their emotional turbulence, is because we're stuck in a state of resistance and rejecting of that emotional turbulence.
Mhm.
It's natural to have emotions. It's natural to have low emotions. It's natural to not always be happy,
Mhm.
but we reject it and resist it and we judge it either consciously or subconsciously as we're going through that, instead of saying, look, what time of the year is it. Literally, there are animals that go into hibernation for months during this time of year.
Mhm.
So it's very natural for us to slow down, for us to kind of be a little bit more affected by the weather, and understanding that and just stepping into, can I accept first and foremost that that my body's slowing down right now, that the natural season of R&R, rest and recuperate, is happening right now.
Mhm.
It's very challenging for people, especially in Western society, where we live in a place where it is constantly moving, going, achieve externally, create external success, and then having to present that to family members or other people during a time period where everyone comes together,
Mhm.
like the holidays. And
Right.
so there's so many layers of, well, what's going on here. But the truth is if we were to just immediately accept our emotions for what they are in
Mhm.
whatever form they show up in, that is step number one. But it's almost like a leap.
Mhm.
It's so impactful and so important to just say, sometimes I'm sad,
Mhm.
sometimes I don't feel good,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you 100% in all of that. And, I was even taking a few notes as you were talking, because, one of the important things that you really said, especially toward the end, was that external focus. And so many of us are conditioned in society to be externally focused on, oh my gosh, what's mom going to think if I don't show up for Christmas dinner? I really don't want to be with my family. I know it's going to be a struggle. I know it's going to be a shit show because we're all dysfunctional. And I really don't have the capacity to go through it. But what's mom going to think? And I have to be there and I have to go through this and I have to do that. And we convince ourselves through this sense of obligation to please other people that we have to do certain things. Um,
Mm,
and, we're living up to somebody else's expectation instead of accepting ourselves and what we're going through. So the difference between expecting and accepting can
mm,
be the difference, between your empowerment through the struggle or your suffering, and the extenuation of the suffering that you experience inside yourself.
yes, yes, and it's so true. And I mean, even with Melanie and myself, so my birthday's in beginning of November, so we had my birthday and then Thanksgiving pretty
Mhm.
back to back. And uh, I had a small birthday dinner, mostly family, and afterwards, I just was like, that wasn't very fun.
Mhm.
It was kind of very surface level conversation the whole time. There were, like you said, dysfunctions going on in my
Mhm.
family. This person's not talking to this person. These two people are kind of like passively aggressively doing their thing. These two people over here are having a weird conversation. And
Mhm.
afterwards I was like, I don't want to choose this again.
Mhm.
And so Thanksgiving was different. We kind of split up some stuff.
Mhm.
Christmas is going to be different for us as well. We were just like, why are we doing, because we have been doing something and it really, it's been the last
Yeah.
couple of years. And so Mel and I were just like, no, what do we want to do?
Right.
We want to wake up at our own place. We've
Mhm.
got 3 cats and a dog. We want to spend some time with our 3 cats and our dog.
Mhm.
We want to, wake up with some hot chocolate, maybe throw in a Christmas tree. We want to do it
Mhm.
our way.
Yeah.
We've done it other people's way for so many years
Beautiful.
because of, like you're saying, the obligation of, well,
Mhm.
this person might be alone or this person that or this. It's like,
Mhm.
we're going to create our own space. If we want to have a separate time, a couple days before, a couple days after, where we meet and we just do, something fun and functional.
Mm-hmm.
We did this last weekend, and it was great because it was a smaller grouping. It wasn't the whole grouping,
Mm-hmm.
and it went really well.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where, what do I want?
Right.
And honestly, in a selfish way, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Because
Mm-hmm.
self-care is selfish as well. Selfish, everyone thinks of self, well, not everyone. A lot of people think of selfish as this negative term.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, like what's your heart desiring? Are you someone who loves the holidays, but you haven't loved them in 10 years because it's been, let's make it
Mm-hmm.
through?
Right.
Or like, how do we redesign this period of time to be something that you're like, hey, that sounds good for
Right.
once.
Right. And self-care is so important. And again, I love that you said that, about how you are shifting your holidays and how you're shifting your traditions within your little unit with your family, with you, Melanie, your cats and your dog. That's so important to honor, to thine own self be true, Shakespeare, like he was one of the wisest philosophers, that we've had, if we would just look at his writings. And that's what he's talking about, is look within, and to thine own self be true. And self-care is, in my humble opinion, knowing how to honor what's happening inside of you instead of living up to somebody else's expectation of you, because that's the difference between and I just recently had this conversation with somebody else. Fitting in and belonging. Fitting in comes from a dysfunctional need, and it's often trauma-driven behavior, and belonging comes from a sense of self-acceptance. And, just settling into what feels good and where it feels good to be. And if it doesn't feel good, and I've done this my whole life, I have struggled and struggled, and I have gone out of my way with so many dysfunctional, perfectionistic, procrastinating, self-defeating behaviors to try to fit in with my family, instead of accepting that, yeah, if I weren't born into this family, I probably wouldn't have consciously chosen it for myself, because when it comes down to it, these aren't my people. I can choose, I can go out into the world and choose my people. And my son and I did the same thing around Thanksgiving. We had a conversation the day before, and we chose sanity over family.
That's funny.
We did. It was a conscious choice, Wednesday morning. And we're like, I don't want to make that drive. It's, this year my family made a reservation at a restaurant, and I found out later the whole meal was less than an hour, in and out in less than an hour. And it was a 2-hour drive one way for us. So I'm like, if I had driven 4 hours round trip for a less than a 1 hour meal, I'm like, that would have ruined my whole day. And instead we had a fantastic day. We didn't leave the house. I don't think I even took my PJs off and got dressed for real.
I love it.
So
I love it.
Again, just kind of learning to honor yourself and do what makes yourself happy. And experiencing the joy that comes with it, because we both experienced a lot of joy that day, without even leaving the house, whereas we knew it would have been a whole different scenario. And so I kind of like to shift the conversation into, how does a person, from your opinion, Harry, and from your experience, how does a person come to that level of awareness where they start to realize that they're honoring themselves and accepting themselves instead of trying to live up to somebody's expectations? How do you help people make that shift?
Well, a large part of the beginning of us working with someone is typically a self-inquiry process. So we give them a list of questions that allows someone to think about things that they might not have thought about before. Like, what is it that I want from my time with you? So that could just be transferred into, what is it that I want out of this holiday season or out of this winter season? I don't know can be an answer, and that's okay. So let's sit with that. Let's try to come up with a couple of things that might sound good, or that might sound something that would be growth oriented, or whatever draws someone in. And then we always follow that up with, Why do you want that? And that's a really powerful question to start gaining some deeper clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And it can come down to, whether or not we find the root cause of something that we don't necessarily need to. If we're seasoned at that practice, we can.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really powerful to find out, because what winds up happening, probably 9 times out of 10 with clients of mine, that as we're doing some life work and life coaching, and okay, we set these 5 goals over the next 6 months. As time goes on, 2 or 3 of those goals start to fall away.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, I'm failing. I said, no. What's probably happening is you don't actually care about those goals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the truth is that was someone else's goal.
Yes.
Someone else's should
Mm-hmm.
that you adopted along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that happened 5 years ago or 35 years ago.
Right.
But it's now subconscious, and you think that you have this need to fulfill some external, some level of career, some level of fitness, some level of relationship. Same thing with holidays. It needs to look a certain way. I have to be with my family because it's a time of family. I have to, spend all this money on all these people and all these
Mm-hmm.
gifts. And there's a lot of shoulds around it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the immediate action step that I would say is ask, what do you want and why do you want it? And get really clear on that why. Is this mine
Mm-hmm.
or is this society's? Because this is what society tells us.
Yes.
And the more clarity we can do or can get around that, the more we can be like, yeah, I'm doing the exact opposite of what I actually want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this actually is pretty in line with it. I'm going to do this. This sounds good.
Right.
And so it gives us direction.
Yeah. And I love that you said that. And sometimes the only thing I'd like to add in here is sometimes we have to add the layers of why. Like, you ask why the first time, don't just settle with the first answer. Keep asking why. And like a little kid, well, like, why is the sky blue? Do you give an answer? Well, why? Well, why? Well, why? And eventually you run out of whys. It's like, oh my God, shut up. But sometimes we have to go within and do that inside of ourselves, really, to dig deep into that why, because sometimes that surface why is coming from the conscious mind, and it's not digging down into those subconscious core beliefs that motivate what we create, the stories that we create with our conscious mind, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that is 100% what we have. Even on our sheet, we say why, once you've answered why, ask it again, and then ask it again. And just like you said, we say, be a child.
Yeah.
Be a child. So that I beautifully said.
Absolutely. Yeah. And how can you help people know the difference? And I see this all the time with clients that I work with. And with each client, it's a little bit different of a challenge, is helping the client, at least in my experience, it's a different challenge each time, is helping the client realize when things that seem to be good practices might have become distorted and become ways that we avoid and hijack. So for example, like beating the winter blues, like one of the things they say is, like, go outside and exercise, like put your shoes on and go for a run, or go to the gym and like work it out. How do we know when that's really benefiting us versus an avoidance tactic, like, oh, I'm starting to feel sad. I don't want to feel sad, so I'm going to avoid this feeling that's coming up by going out to the gym. How can we determine that inside of ourselves?
And honestly, I think you've even said it within that. And it's 9 times out of 10, I believe that we know. And it's as simple as asking ourselves, how am I feeling? And am I trying to avoid this? And that comes from, oh, I'm going to throw on a movie right now, because in truth, you're feeling lonely. And you don't want to feel lonely. So I'm going to avoid that feeling by putting something else on. I'm feeling sad or low energy, so I'm going to go to the gym. Can those things be healthy at times? Yeah, absolutely. A movie or the gym inherently is not a bad thing, but it's also inherently not a good thing. And that's what people, like, we fall in categories sometimes. And so I think that's the simplest thing is tune into your emotions, become aware of what's going on. If you're not feeling great, sit down, take a breath, and just become aware. And a really powerful practice is if you just close your eyes and you tune into whatever you're feeling, try to find it in your body. Where is this in my body? This one is kind of, it peaks in my heart, but it kind of goes down my spine and then it wraps around into my, pelvic floor.
Mm-hmm.
This one is, just in my throat. There's something I want to say to someone,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not coming out. I might not even know that. I just might feel frustration or anger and I feel it in my throat. And so wherever it is, tune into it,
Mm-hmm.
feel it out, sit with it. That's the number one thing is don't avoid.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of bypassing. And
Right.
then once you've gone there, interact with it. You
Mm-hmm.
can literally say, all right, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need? In your body's either subconscious intelligence, higher intelligence, like there will be an answer
Mm-hmm.
that comes up if you're just quiet and you listen.
Yeah.
I need to be safe. I do not feel safe around this person.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be seen. How can I start to see myself a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more? I need you to take better care of me because you've been eating McDonald's for 20 days in a row and I'm about to, whatever it is,
Yes.
listen to your body's innate intelligence and it will tell you things.
Mm-hmm.
But if we keep avoiding feeling that way, feeling whatever way we want to avoid feeling,
Mm-hmm.
we start to suppress, we start to avoid, we start to bypass. And that's when we wind up not liking the holidays. We
Mm-hmm.
wind up storing all this emotional pattern, whether there's a conscious thought process along with it or not, but there's this emotional response and pattern that might have been from 20 years ago. We might not know, but let's just say it's just from this time around. Well,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? We've then stored it and created a neurological connection that next year when this comes up, guess what's going to be triggered?
Mm-hmm.
That emotional pattern. And so it's one of those things where it's like people might think consciously or subconsciously, well, I just, you know, whatever, I'm just going to toss this aside. In truth, that tossing it aside, it's always there and it's always going to stay there until you sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so sitting with it, not avoiding it, being with it. And if you need someone to support or to help, finding a friend or finding someone who you trust, watching a awesome podcast and you're like, you know what, I really like her stuff. Maybe I could reach out to her, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
There are resources, but how can we sit with what's going on instead of always running from it?
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it does take a skilled practitioner who knows how to hold space to help, just by example, by holding space for us while we are experiencing these difficult emotions. Help sitting with somebody who knows how to do that can help us learn how to do it for ourselves.
Yes.
And so that's why, I believe it is important to find a skilled practitioner that can help, at least in the beginning phases, to teach you how to do this for yourself. And the teaching is by example. It's not something we can put in a workbook or a workshop and really teach, because my process for holding space is probably similar to yours. So there's a framework that I can teach people. And at the same time, the actual execution of it comes from experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's very well
Mhm.
said. And I do want to just echo and mimic that to anyone watching this, which is um, there has been over time a stigma around asking for help.
Mhm.
And there, while I understand where that might have come from once upon a time, um, it's actually not only a courageous act to ask for help, but it's just a good practice in self-care.
Mhm.
If you want to create change in your life, whatever category that person falls under, coach, counselor, therapist, psychiatrist, like wherever it comes from, whatever you're drawn to, experience it. And like you said, learn the tools to be able to hold space for yourself eventually,
Mhm.
ideally. And that's another thing is that uh, some of my clients or friends will say, well, Harry, you seem like you're pretty even keeled most of the time. And, how did you overcome emotions? And I said, I didn't overcome them. I experience them and I no longer avoid them, so that when they come up, I know how to hold space for myself. And I have a different relationship with them now.
Absolutely.
Sadness is no longer something that I reject and judge myself for. Anger or depression are no longer things that I try to avoid, because that's not what a spiritual person does.
Hmm.
I allow them to come. I honor them. I sit with them, ask them what they need. If it's just an old wiring, then okay, that's great. I'm going to shift out of it because I'm a new person.
Hmm.
Or, hey, this is telling me something. This is pointing something out to me. This is telling me that this situation I'm in, I'm not in alignment with. And this is how it's showing up. Emotions are fantastic indicators of something else going on.
Hmm.
And they can be some of our greatest teachers if we allow them to, if we give them the space to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I see emotions very similarly. Emotions are, it's like our internal guidance system. And if you really think about the role that emotions play, um, emotions like fear and anger and sadness, that's how we interact with our environment. When we walk into a room, you can feel that there's tension if the people in
Mm,
the room are angry and arguing. They might look at you and smile and say, oh yeah, come on in, everything's great, but you can cut the tension with a knife if you're in touch with your emotions and sensations and what you feel and experience inside your body. And if you're not in touch with that internal guidance system and you miss it, you can put yourself you in situations that you really don't want to be in, because our conscious mind can override all of that and we can easily talk ourselves out of what we're feeling and what we're sensing. And the emotions like anger, for example, somebody does something and that anger comes up. Anger is letting us know that somebody crossed a boundary. So, it's like, it's time for us to do something. Like, what happened within me where I lost the establishment of that boundary? Because I believe boundaries are for ourselves. So it's trying
mm,
to keep things out that can hurt us. And emotions, like joy and euphoria, those are things that feel really good inside of our body. And we want more of that. We want more joy in our lives and less anger and less fear. So if our emotions are trying to keep things out that are maybe harmful or not good for us, and let things in that are good for us, and it sounds very similar in function to our immune system. So it's almost like the
mm,
immune system for our psyche. It's
mm.
just that nonverbal immune system. So it, and then again, when we go to a much deeper layer and we look at the suppression, and I love that you brought up the suppression of emotions. And this is a time of year when people like to suppress and avoid and not honor their emotions, not sit with them like you were talking about. And the more we resist them, the more they persist and the more they try to come up, and the more we try to suppress them. There is a direct connection between our emotional body, our mental body, our spiritual body, and our physical body. So the suppression of those emotions will manifest eventually as some sort of chronic illness in our physical body if we continue to ignore them, which almost makes sense that they're tied in, somehow with our immune system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so well said. And that's the holistic approach. And that's, recognizing even biologically the function of being with our sympathetic nervous system kicked up and being in fight or flight mode, because this so and so that we interact with on a daily basis or within the time of the holidays, uh, our brain literally goes into the same mode that we would have if it had seen a predator,
Mhm.
a lion trying to hunt us
Mhm.
few thousand years ago. And so if we're
Yes.
kicking up that sympathetic nervous system, we're disbalancing or creating an imbalance in our cortisol levels and
Mhm.
the immunoglobulin on the other side of things.
Right.
It throws off our entire immune system, as you're saying. So,
Mhm.
a lot of people do, recognizing the holistic connection. I mean, there's a lot
Mhm.
to it, but it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be as simple as what you just said, which is
Mhm.
why I think is so powerful. It's just, hey, these are all connected,
Mm-hmm.
and emotions are one of the most powerful ways to be in tune with how we are doing.
Yes.
And, whether physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, how are we doing? Emotions teach us, tell us, and can guide us
Right.
to a healthy state of being.
Right. Absolutely. And Harry, I know that you talk a lot about, kind of like our societal conditioning. I'm not
Mm,
sure that that's the term that you use. That's the term I'm using right now, but how we are conditioned and programmed from the environment and the world and, the society that we live in. There's the family unit, then there's the local unit, then there's our friends, the collective consciousness of the world around us.
mm,
And that collective consciousness, especially in the United States, teaches us that emotions are something we should be afraid of.
mm,
So experiencing fear, it's okay to have depression and go take a pill and take an SSRI for it. That's more okay than admitting that, okay, I'm sad and I really need to have a good cry.
yeah.
So I would love to hear your input on um, encouraging people maybe to go against the grain. Because there is a lot of discomfort that comes with that, with realizing that, okay, I am not in the flow with mainstream society anymore. Um, and I think people experience a lot of fear, again, about that belonging and fitting in, like, oh my gosh, if I go my own way, I'm not going to fit in, I'm going to lose friends, I'm going to lose family. Um,
Right.
so could you talk a little bit about that, and just help people get that in alignment on, okay, if I'm going to sit with my emotions, I'm going to be the unicorn in my group of friends. How's that going to
Yeah.
look? How's that going to work?
Yeah. And I think that starts with just kind of understanding a basic understanding of, I call it cultural programming or cultural
Okay.
conditioning. So very, very similar.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
But like just understanding how that typically works, and the way that a snapshot of that is from the moment that we're born, those that care for us begin to program us. It's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. That typically the first thing that we start to be programmed with is language. That's both body language as well as vocal language. As time goes on, based on the culture we're born into, remember, like 100 years ago in Ghana versus 500 years ago in China versus today in the US, it's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
I start to learn about society. I start to learn about religion. I start to learn about the education system, politics, so on and so forth. I get a world painted for me. And within that, based off of whoever's caring for me, I start to learn the right way to be and the wrong way to be.
Mm-hmm.
I start to learn what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. I start to learn what's rewarded and what's punished based off of my own experiences with the people caring for me. Then as time goes on, this starts to come in from multiple angles, from my peers, from my teachers, from nowadays social media and media, literature, so on and so forth. So it's coming in from all these angles. And what often happens is then I start to form a view of the world and a view of myself and how I should be,
Mm-hmm.
in order to fit the box, in order to fit the paradigm, the cultural paradigm of what I'm born into.
Mm-hmm.
So it winds up affecting my beliefs and my belief system. It winds up affecting my emotions, my thought patterns, starts affecting my actions, starts affecting my preferences, starts affecting everything. And what can happen is that if we feel a certain way that doesn't fit the box, then what? What do I do? And what happens is there's a fear response, both biologically as well as psychologically, that comes up. And it's very simple, which is 100,000 years ago or however long ago, if I was in a tribe or a group, I had a higher level of chance that I would survive, because there's less predators that could attack me if I'm in a group of 30 versus a group of one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally my brain trying to protect me by keeping me in a group,
Mm-hmm.
even if the group is unhealthy.
Yes.
Now we add the cultural conditioning on top of that, and the cultural perspective of what it is to be, how I should be fitting into this group. then I get all of my own internal opinions and judgments and all these things going on, and then my own emotions and all of these things that adds on top of this biological need to fit in. And it's no wonder that people are deathly afraid of conflict, are deathly afraid of, being alone.
Mm-hmm.
There is such a stigma around being alone
Right.
in today's world. And I always say, look, being lonely and being alone are two different things. They do not need to be connected.
Yeah.
And so that being just kind of a base understanding, fitting in or stepping out of a social setting, a social group, can be very challenging. I've done it multiple times. In fact, I wound up changing. I had a very strong, tight-knit group of friends in high school, and from before then, that I just was going a different way in life. And I wound up going to the China and the ashram and all those things. And that was the beginning of our diverging.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, there are a fair amount of them that don't understand why I wound up going my own way of life, still think that I judged them because I didn't want to be around them. They have their own stories,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I needed to be true to myself. I needed to step out of that situation. I needed to be healthy. I couldn't keep being around the same mentality, around the same energy, around the same drama, around the same fill in the blank with all of these things that we get trapped into because we have a biological and psychological need to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just can have the courage to recognize this is not healthy for me anymore, if it's not, and to step out of that and to maybe start to find people that are of my tribe, are of, a little bit more, whether that's through a meetup group, through, just following specific podcasts, through reading specific types of books. And I mean, they are out there, even though they might be in a smaller portion and group. And so we are conditioned to feel the need and to have a should, that we should be a certain way because around the holidays, you're with family.
Mm-hmm.
That's a should. That's a belief. It's not a universal truth.
Right.
And recognizing that is very empowering and saying, no, I do have a choice here. I can create the holidays in a way that feels in alignment with me.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? The first couple holidays or the first one or two times, however long it takes to get there, it might be a rocky start, as are a lot of things in life. As we're stepping out into the unknown, into, hey, what does this, I know I don't want to be around them, but I don't know what to replace it with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it might take a little bit of time to get the ball rolling, but that's okay.
Absolutely.
That isn't, I wouldn't say take that as an affirmation that you should be with those people. No, it's just, now I have blank canvas. What do I want to paint?
Right.
And playing around and finding out what masterpiece you want to create with your time in your life.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Harry, that's a brilliant answer. And there's so much going on in what you said. And one of the things that, I do want to kind of point out for the listeners that you said that's so important is, as we're growing up as children, we are taught what's good and bad and what's right and wrong and acceptable and unacceptable. And there is a punishment and reward system for us when we are children. And when we grow up in a family that indoctrinates us into a certain religion in general, especially Christianity. I got to be honest, there are some other religions I don't know a whole heck of a lot about, but the religion, the big ones, they promote the ultimate reward and punishment system. And that creates, it's like the ultimate reward and punishment system is, if you do A, B, C, D, F, you'll go to heaven. And if you don't do these things, you're going to go to hell. And, so that really is the ultimate reward and punishment system. And if you buy into that belief system, then it really creates this state of almost inner suffering inside of ourselves. And I am such a proponent of letting go of labels, because you've said a few times today, you've mentioned good and bad, and you said, it's not necessarily good or bad. And that is so true. It's like good or bad, who's to say? What seems good on the surface right now could end up for you personally being a decision that, takes you down a path that increases your suffering later in life. So what, so I believe we get to determine for ourselves what's good or bad for us. I
Mm.
don't believe we get to tell other people what's good or bad for them. Those sorts of labels, uh, at least that's how I approach life. I get to tell myself, yeah, this is a good thing for me. I'm going to do this right now. This feels right. This feels good. This feels okay. This feels beneficial. I don't get to tell that to other people. They have to make that determination for themselves, because when other people make that determination for me, that's them, you've heard the saying, shoulding on somebody.
Mm.
So don't should on yourself and don't should on other people.
Yeah, and that's another highlight of it, because it is so important. Because in reality, a lot of the, whether it comes from religion or some other place, a lot of the rights and wrongs are, it's perspective, it's relative, it's cultural programming.
Exactly.
I've spent time in Ghana, and I can tell you that their Christian religion versus someone in Michigan's Christian religion, they're not the same thing. They're very culturally dependent, and that's that gets into the cultural relative conversation. But it's understanding that, and even within, if we talk about Christianity, and we talk about the 10 Commandments, and we talk about the do's and don'ts, how does that feel for you? Is this right for you, like you were saying? And being able to find your own path, because no matter how many Christians or Buddhists or pagans or whatever it is there are, every single one of them is going to walk a different path, because it's always an individual process of unfolding. And so finding out really what fits with your alignment in your heart, what feels good, going back to emotions and feelings, what feels good to you, finding out, sitting with those feelings, understanding and being guided by them. And what can happen if we don't do that and we just fall into someone else's paradigm and box is what you were saying. It can bring up shame. It can bring up guilt. It can bring up the feeling that I'm never going to be enough, because I never feel like I'm ever going to measure up to someone else's measuring stick.
Right.
And so we live our lives trying to fulfill someone else's need of me.
Yeah. And sometimes, especially, again, with the topic that we've been talking about, just like how to, get yourself through some of these challenging months in the winter. There's also this societal expectation of, that whole misery loves company. So if you're experiencing seasonal affective disorder and I'm experiencing seasonal affective disorder, we can stand around the water cooler at break tomorrow and we can bitch about it together.
Right.
So there's the connection. So there's that victimhood that connects us with other people, which is also part of our societal conditioning. So how do you encourage people to break out of that?
I want to highlight one thing real quick and then transition.
Sure.
That's so Brene Brown. I'm sure you're familiar with her work. She has a book, and one of the chapters of her book is I'm going to butcher this, but it's stress and overwork is not a status symbol.
Yeah.
And just the idea that I work myself 18 hours a day, so I have more of a reason to bitch and complain than you do.
Yeah, right.
Type of thing. And it's the same thing. It's like when misery loves company, it's almost like we're comparing or we're competing around who's more miserable or has more reasons to be exhausted or tired. But it creates this status symbol, like I won. And Mel and I sit there, and when people ask us how you doing, and our answer is genuinely, I'm fantastic. I've designed a life that I love. I work with people that I genuinely love working with. I have a family that I have taken years to set up in a way that I really enjoy. 3 cats and a dog, all rescues. I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
It's almost this like, oh, well, it's nice to be you. It's like, well, thank you. I've taken a long time to create this, so I appreciate that, And so, that's what the beginning of the answer once again is if you find yourself falling into the drama circle or into the, like you said, the victimhood circle or into the matching someone else's negative energy because you feel like that's how you need to connect with them, pause, take a moment and say, if I changed nothing, Where am I going to be in 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to be here in 5 years again?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, it's in that moment
Mm-hmm.
that you begin to shift. It's in that moment you begin
Yeah.
to disrupt an old neural connection that says drama, drama, drama.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start making new decisions like, I don't want to feed this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I want to connect with this person, but at what cost to myself?
Right.
And so just being aware as the holidays come on of, once again, your emotional patterns, other people's emotional patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and not judging them for it. If that's where they are, that's where they are.
Yeah.
That's okay. But do you want to be there? Make the decision for yourself, change in yourself, set boundaries for yourself, and follow them. And
Mm-hmm.
you can begin over time to create a life that you wake up being excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least even when you're in the troughs, you're literally existentially content. Like
Mm-hmm.
your existence, you're content with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you
Absolutely.
carry this centeredness with you. Doesn't mean you
Yeah.
don't have anger or frustration or whatever it may be,
Right.
but you're centered when those
Mm-hmm.
things come along. And it starts in seasons like this, because these are the opportunities
Mm-hmm.
to become aware of what's going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And oh, Harry, that's beautiful. Yes, this is an opportunity to start to self-examine. We go through these seasons and these cycles, and it's like the season of winter is a gift that's handed to us. So we do have this opportunity to go within and to do a little hibernating away from the rest of the world and away from society, to go within and do some self-exploration. And and I loved your answer. And the only thing I would add to that is, I believe we have to ask ourselves, what am I gaining from this chronic bitching and complaining? What does
Yeah,
it give me? Because sometimes it does. It gives me that connection with somebody else. And it's oftentimes this false sense of connection, because a lot of times that connection is rooted in some sort of dysfunctional behavior. And complaining is a dysfunctional behavior. Again, I'm a trauma specialist who focuses on developmental and intergenerational issues. So chronic complaining oftentimes does stem from a developmental trauma, sometimes one that happens pre-verbally that we're not even aware of, or it's a conditioned response that we learn from our parents. If you have people in your family who are chronic complainers, do you recognize that in yourself? Is it something that you just learned, from your environment, from your nurturing?
yeah.
Because nurturing, seems like such a wonderful word, but sometimes nurturing, again, it's not good or bad. It takes that turn that leads us into dysfunction. We can be nurtured into dysfunction.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which, I would, depending on one's definition of dysfunction, I would argue that the majority, even if that majority is only 51%, I believe it to be more than that. Most people, I would say that the majority of people in one way or another are nurtured into dysfunction.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
Which is why the world is in the state that it's in right now. There's, never been more mental health disease, physical diseases, environmental challenges. I mean, just throw a dart in some direction and you'll find something that's going on. And
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with how we are reared and how we are developed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
is saying, hold the phone.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We can change this.
Absolutely. And there is a better way. And that better way is, I believe, to stop looking outside for validation and to go inside to find that self-acceptance and to learn to belong to yourself. If you belong to yourself, it doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter whether you fit in. You'll always have a sense of belonging in the world.
So well said. And that's the heart of the alone versus lonely conversation.
Yes.
I've been alone a lot in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally found that inner acceptance, I was never lonely after that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yes, like your choice might be to be alone, but it doesn't mean you're going to be lonely, because you're whole in yourself. You're at home in yourself, as you said. So yes,
Yeah.
very well said.
Absolutely. Harry, for any of our listeners who might want to reach out to you and get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Just going to consciously.org and to the contact us sheet. Very simple. Just type in, hey, this is who I am. Heard you on this podcast and would love to talk. It can be that simple, very simple. Or it can be more specific, of course. And then we always do, if you want to do a one-on-one conversation, we do free consultations. And sometimes those just turn into really good conversations and a new connection is birthed. So that's the quickest and easiest way. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So again, that was consciously.org. And I'll make sure that I throw a link up in the show notes. So if anybody goes to the show notes, they can just click on the link and it'll open the tab for you. Well, Harry, it's really been a pleasure and an honor to have you on here today. Again, my listeners know that I'm not really into the bullshit. So when I bring a guest on, I bring people on who, you know, I've kind of done some pre-screening with. I know that they're the real deal, and I can attest to you and to Melanie that, you know, you're both the real deal. And I would like to talk to you about possibly having you on again later to talk about if you and Melanie are open to it, possibly having a plant medicine or psychedelic medicine conversation.
Because I would be honored.
Yeah.
And Mel would definitely be a great person on that subject. I would probably be more in the side than her. But yeah, that's a very powerful conversation. And honored that you had me on. It really is. I want to shine a little gratitude on you really quickly. It's these conversations that can create change, that can create shift, that can create that moment of, hey, wait a minute, things can be different. And the fact that you are hosting these consistently and in a no BS way, it's really powerful. So I want to honor you for the work that you're doing in this, in just conscious conversations alone, let alone all the other work you're doing as well.
Well, thank you, Harry. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you've done on yourself and the gift that you're giving back to the world as a result of what you've done for yourself. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
Before we sign off, do you have any final tips or bits of wisdom to leave with our listeners today?
A great quote that I always go back to is, you are the one that you have been waiting for. You are the one. And so whenever you're ready, take that step. Take that step. And it's the beginning of your next phase. Your journey's already going, but it's the beginning of the next chapter. And maybe that's the, biggest change that you've ever had, or the smallest, but it's, mountains are climbed one step at a time, and it takes you. So you're the one you've been waiting for.
Beautiful. Well, Harry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for all of our listeners, this is Jennifer Whitacre. If you want more information about me, please go to jenniferwhitacre.com. That's JenniferWhitacre.com. And if you go to the podcast page, you can read, watch, or listen, because my show in an edited version goes up in video, audio, and blog formats. And if you like to listen, please subscribe and leave a review. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and feel free to reach out to me. I love to hear from my listeners. And for all of you listeners, I'm glad you were with us today, and I will see you all next week.
We have just concluded another episode of the Yes and podcast with Jennifer Whitacre. For additional resources, please visit our website, jenniferwhitacre.com. Leave a review if you enjoyed the show and find it useful. Until next time, continue challenging conventional thinking and keep moving forward.